What is up everyone? My name is Joseph and welcome to this video. In this video, I'm going to go over some suggestions and guidelines for buying ranged equipment and what order is the best order to buy those items in. Before we get into the actual build order, I want to state a few assumptions that we kind of have to make this video go a little bit smoothly. The first one is that I'm going to assume you're able to get either untradeable items or quest items mentioned. So for example, imbuing a ring or getting Ava's accumulator, I'm going to assume that you're able to do that. The next assumption is that if you are doing Slayer, just switch whatever helmet slot I mentioned with the Slayer helm imbued. I don't really want to get into specific situations, and I am going to keep this guide very general. However, Slayer is the one caveat to that, to where I'm going to say, if you are in that situation, use a Slayer helm imbued. The next statement I want to make is that I'm not going to be addressing Void in this video, just due to the fact that it's very situational and it has a lot of intricacies with it, and I want to address Void in its very own video and kind of go over things more in depth in that video, rather than rushing through it here. The last thing I want to state is that I will be talking about ammo towards the end of the video. I'm not going to include it in the build order, but I will be talking briefly about it towards the end of the video. So with that all being said, let's get into which order you should upgrade your ranged equipment. So on screen, you see the first general build out, and this will be the base build that you can pretty much just buy all at once. The total value for this is 92k, just a little bit over 92k, so you should be able to afford this when you start to train range. Some things to note here is that the best and most cost-efficient ammo to use with the rune crossbow would be the broad bolt for most general cases. And another thing to mention is that the reason I chose the Blessed D'hide Coif here instead of something such as the Karil's Coif is that it gives the same ranged accuracy bonus as the Karil's Coif. However, it does give extra prayer bonus for around the same cost. So it does help you out a little bit more if you will be using prayer in that specific situation. So this build is what I would categorize as a low tier build. This is what you should be basing everything off of, and this should really be your starting point. So now what we're going to do is take a look at how we can turn this low level build into about a mid-level build, in which order you should upgrade your equipment in. So the first thing you want to look at getting is the Toxic Blowpipe to replace your rune crossbow. Now it does have a price of about 2.5 mil. However, the amount of DPS it gives you over the rune crossbow and broad bolts is higher than pretty much any other piece of gear you can buy. Again, it is a little bit more expensive, and it does have kind of a degrade cost with the scales, but even if you're only using mithril darts, this will give you the highest DPS increase for the amount of money it costs. The next item you should look at upgrading is your black D'hide vamp braces into Barrows Gloves. These are going to stay at 130k since you buy them from a shop, and they're going to be your new best in slot gloves. So you should definitely pick these up towards the beginning of your upgrades. The next item you should look at attaining is Blessed D'hide boots. They are a little bit more expensive at 620 to 750k depending on which style you choose. However, all the styles give the same bonuses, so in general, unless you really care about the color, just choose the cheapest one. The next item on our list is the Archer's Ring Imbued. This again is a little bit more expensive, sitting just above 2.6 mil. However, it does give quite a bit of an accuracy bonus, so it's definitely worth picking up. Next, we'll be moving to the head slot, and the item I've chosen for this is the Robin's Hood hat. Something to note here is that it does not give a huge DPS increase over the Blessed D'hide Coif, and it does lose that prayer bonus, so really depending on your situation, you may or may not skip over this item. The last group of items we have here is the Blessed D'hide Body, Chaps, and the Fury Amulet. Now the reason these are all grouped together is they all really don't give you an increase in DPS. However, they do all have their advantages. For example, using the Fury over the Glory gives you some increase in bonuses for using melee and gives you some more defense. And using the Blessed D'hide Body and Chaps allows you to get a few more prayer bonus points over the black D'hide Top and Chaps. However, again, these will not increase your ranged DPS, so you should really buy these on a situational basis depending on what you're doing in the game. If you are doing more melee and you really need that Fury for melee, pick that up first. However, the Blessed D'hide Top and Chaps are fairly cheap, so if you do want that extra prayer bonus while doing Slayer or bossing with ranged, you can pick those up at a pretty low cost, sitting around 60k for the chaps and 100k for the body. One thing I did want to talk about really quick here was the Krill's leather top and bottom. Now, you're really not going to be picking these up for just normal range training because they give the same range bonuses as Black D'hide top and bottom. And the only advantages they give is a little bit of extra magic defense. So unless you really need that defensive stat, I would not suggest picking these up, as they are much more expensive and they do degrade over time. So in the long run, they're much more expensive. So that wraps up our mid-tier build and allows us to go into the high end or the end game items. So generally when you're upgrading gear, the weapon slot is the first thing you take a look at. However, for ranged, the blowpipe will pretty much be your best slot item for general range training. So you're going to want to stick with that. I will be talking about the Armadale Crossbow and the Twisted Bow at the end of this section, but for now, sticking with the Toxic Blowpipe is perfectly fine and suggested. So the first real upgrade you'll want to look at getting is the Necklace of Anguish. This gives a lot of ranged bonus increase over the Fury and is sitting at just over 11 mil, so it is one of the cheaper items that you'll be picking up. The next thing to take a look at is the head slot, and more specifically, the Armadillo helmet. Now again, if you're doing Slayer, just replace this with the Slayer helm, but the Armadillo helmet sits at around 4 mil, and although it doesn't give huge increases for its price, it's worth picking up towards the beginning of these upgrades. Item number 3 on our high tier list are Pegasian boots. Now these are fairly expensive at just over 25 mil currently. However, all of the items in this high tier build have a little bit higher of a price point, so 25 mil is really not too outside of the ballpark. The reason we are skipping over Ranger boots is that the Pegasian boots are just upgraded Ranger boots, and they're both pretty much the same price. So there's no real point in getting the Rangers and then upgrading them, as they're pretty much the same price at the moment. Moving past the Pegasian boots, we come to the Armadillo chain skirt. Currently sitting just over 26 mil, it does give some increase in range bonus and some defensive bonuses over the Black D'hide chaps, so picking these up as your fourth item is definitely a good idea if you're getting into that later stage of the game. Following the chain skirt, we come to the last item, which is the Armadale chest plate. This is sitting just over 30 mil and gives pretty much the same DPS increase as the chain skirt, so the only real reason you wait on this is just due to the price. So that really wraps up our high tier build, and now I want to take a few seconds to just talk about really the Armadale Crossbow and the shield slot. In general, the Armadale Crossbow is not going to be a DPS increase over the blowpipe. However, there are situations where it is very useful and more useful than the blowpipe. So if you are using the Armadale Crossbow, which again sits just over 22 mil, then your shield slot becomes available again, since it is a one-handed weapon. So when looking at upgrading your shield slot, you really just need to look at the price and buy the next one up when you have the money too. So the Book of Law is what you would get first, as it's really the cheapest shield slot for ranged. The next would be the Odium Ward, and then the Twisted Buckler. The reason I don't have these in the normal progression list, as again, it is very situational on when you will even be using a one-handed weapon, and I want to keep this guideline as general as possible, so I didn't want to get into those specific situations. However, if you are finding yourself needing a shield, just go with whatever the best one is you can afford, and that's really the one that you should be using at that time. Now the Twisted Bow is another item that is very good and also very expensive, sitting currently around 1 bill. By the time you're ready to get this item, you most likely will not need any of my advice for anything gear related, so just use your best judgment when it comes to the Twisted Bow. Now that we're done talking about the gear upgrades, let's take just a minute or two to talk about your ammo slot, and more specifically, which darts to use with your blowpipe, since that is the item you'll be using most of the time for ranged. So I'm putting on screen a table of the 4 main darts, Mithril through Dragon, and the price per shot of each of these darts. I'm making the general assumption that you'll be losing 25% of your darts just due to them breaking or them falling on the floor. So based on the price per shot is really what you're going to want to base your upgrading schedule on. So when you can afford upgrading from 6.25 GP to 29 GP per shot, upgrade from Mithril to Adamant. If you feel comfortable spending 245 GP per shot, upgrade to Rune. Even if it's just on a few bosses or for specific situations, you can make that upgrade when you feel comfortable. And keep in mind, this GP per shot is not including the scales, it's purely just on the darts themselves. And then the last dart we have is the Dragon Dart, which again is going to be a little bit even more situational than the rune, but you should only start using Dragon Darts in those situations when you feel comfortable losing that much GP per shot. Each of these darts give between 5% and 6% of a DPS increase over its previous version. So for example, Adamant darts are 5.6% better than Mithril darts in general. So since it is more of a standard increase as you upgrade your darts, it really should just be based on what expendable cash you have at that time. And that really is all I have to say about the darts. I'm not going to be getting into the specific bolts and what to use on what specific bosses, because that will just get way too in-depth and we'll save those for future videos. In general, the bolt you're going to want to use if you're using a crossbow for a boss or for a specific encounter, that bolt is going to be very specific. So for one example, for the Sarah boss, using Diamond Bolt's E is a good idea as it just ignores defenses on its special attack. And things like that are going to kind of dictate what bolt you use for what encounter you're doing. So that is really all I have for this video. I hope it was helpful to you and I hope you enjoyed it. If you do have any other videos like this that you'd like to see, let me know. I do have some plans specifically for Slayer or for Void that will follow a very similar format. But if you have anything that you'd like to see, let me know in the comments below. But again, that is all I have for this video. I hope you guys did enjoy it, and I will see you next time.